On this episode of the DTVC podcast, Sean Malloy from I Must Break This Podcast is on, and we're going to be looking at In Hell, Jean-Claude Van Damme DTV movie from '03, directed by Ringo Lam. So stay tuned for that. In terms of upcoming episodes, still got some recording to do for the next couple weeks. Now, I did record with Ty for his monthly episode, for his October one. We're looking at two Mickey Rourke movies. I think we're going to call the episode Rourke to Oblivion. But, with Ty, because he's on once a month, I try to space his out so it's like kind of in the middle of the month every time. And so with it already recorded, it's one of those things where if some of the ones we have scheduled don't end up happening, I can always kind of put his in, but expect his probably in the middle of the month. And then we got some more recording to do this week to line up for the next couple of weeks there. So stay tuned for that. Of course, always watch this space to see what we've got coming for upcoming episodes. Now, DTVC Extra, nothing really on the docket there. I mean, I've talked about maybe doing that baseball movie. The thing is, again, with me doing some recording coming up here soon, plus next month we've got the Hall of Fame induction movie, so I've got to watch all those movies as well. I can't really use ones that are already, movies that have already been banked that we've covered on the podcast or something like that. So with that in mind, DTVC Extra may take a break, but by the same token, I was considering this weekend doing kind of an impromptu episode on the whole Jimmy Kimmel thing, because just in watching it play out, I felt like a lot of people were much more shocked about that happening than I feel like they should have. So it just kind of tells me that they really didn't understand what's been happening in the media landscape over the past few decades, and how, how companies like Sinclair and Nexstar have been really consolidating their power and their grip and sort of their conservative messaging that they've been putting out there. So I felt like there was a lot of places I could go with that and things to talk about. Because again, even now with Jimmy Kimmel getting his show back on the air, Sinclair is still saying, oh, we're going to preempt it in the markets that we're in. And so I felt like, everybody was like, we're going to boycott Disney. Trump is horrible for the censorship thing. But nobody was really looking at Nexstar and Sinclair. I think John Oliver, I haven't watched his thing yet, but I think he covered it. So I was going to kind of get in on that and sort of, what's happened in the past few decades, especially since Clinton signed the Telecommunications Act, which I think we've talked about before when it comes to radio, how the reason why every rock act in the late 2000s sounded like Nickelback was because of the Telecommunications Act. But also it led to companies like Sinclair buying up all of the local affiliates here, or a lot of local affiliates, and then pushing this sort of conservative slant in all of the news reporting. So you may have seen like in the, like there'll be these memes where it'll just show like all of these anchors across the United States giving the same report, it's all the same stuff. It's because of that. So there was some stuff that I could talk about there, but I never got around to it over the weekend. Maybe I will this weekend. So it's kind of one of those things with that DTVC Extra that you never know where the spirit may move me, that I may get in there. So anyway, why don't we also the blog, in terms of what we got coming up for the blog. So we did Repo Jake this past week. So we were talking about maybe doing Classified. When I did my trip out to Chicago last week, I watched Repo Jake on the plane right out there. Really enjoyed it. Thought, okay, let's review that. I also know, John from PM Podcast, he's been doing Set PM Timber, and I thought we'd get in on that, a little bit of that to do a PM movie this month. So we got some more, some Repo Jake, some more PM up, but then we'll do Classified this weekend. And then next month is the Hall of Fame inductions. So we've got posts coming for that. So, speaking of Repo Jake, which has Colas McKay in it, he's getting the Hall of Fame. We're going to do Three Musketeers, the Asylum movie that he directed. So actually, Will from Exploding Helicopter did a blurb on that on Blue Sky. So he watched it recently. Sounded like it was pretty good. So it should be a fun one to do there for him. And then for Billy Blanks, we're going to look at Time Bomb. I've got Van Damme on the brain. Time Bomb, we're going to be looking at there with a Michael Biehn movie. And then for Imperial Entertainment, the distribution company and production company, we're going to do Sanctuary, Mark DeCasco's movie. And then Kathleen Kidmont, our fourth inductee this year, the Hall of Fame class of 2025. We're going to look at Corporate Ladder, erotic thriller. I don't know why I couldn't think of the term erotic thriller there. Drawing a blank on erotic thriller. Erotic thriller from the 90s there. So that was should be a fun one to watch as well. So keep an eye out for those there in the month of October. Yeah, and then the YouTube channel. I know we haven't posted on there in a little bit beyond our podcast going there. And I did recently this past week. I captured captured video from Showdown in Little Tokyo. I captured the scene where Tia Carrere's about to kill herself, and then Dolph saves her and kind of ambushes some compound or whatever where Cary Tagawa was living. So I got that video, and then the bathhouse fight scene. I took the video from that as well. So I'm probably going to do a couple, 2 different YouTube videos for those, and then maybe we'll do some of the other fights and some of the other things in Showdown in Little Tokyo. So maybe do a series of them there. But one thing that's cool is I got a DVD player recently that I could hook up to my computer, and so that allows me to grab from my DVD collection, grab some videos and things like that. So I'm not beholden to what's on streaming, but also when it's on streaming, like some of them have copyright protection that I can't get the videos from. So now it's like, no, I've got the DVD, I'm all set to go. So I'm gonna maybe go through this DVD collection and find some more that we can do for that, because this should be a lot of fun. So yeah, and it's a little bit of hiatus on the YouTube videos. I think the last one we did was Dark Breed for, again, Rick Pepin passing away. We did that video for him. So hopefully this week we'll get some Showdown in Little Tokyo up. So keep an eye out for that. Then speaking of Dark Breed, in terms of things that I've done from other podcasts, so just keep an eye out for on the PM podcast when John releases that new one on Dark Breed. I'll be a part of that one. He and I discussed Dark Breed there. And then also after Movie Diner, at some point we talked about the movies Becky and Wrath of Becky. I think last week in the cold open, I can't remember if I called it Bridget or Brittany or something like that, but it's Becky and Wrath of Becky. John and I did an episode on that a little while back, so keep an eye out for that on the After Movie Diner podcast. Also, the Deep Blue Sea podcast. I believe this one's going to be coming in November, but I was on the Deep Blue Sea podcast, and we discussed the movie Shark Attack 2. So if you remember that one with Thorsten Kaye and a British guy who was playing like an Australian. So I don't know why I couldn't say. I was trying to go between saying a Brit and a British guy, and it's just my mouth didn't want to do either of them. But anyway, that should be in November. So as we get closer to the time when that one's released, I'll make a mention of that again there as well. I think that is everything. I mean, we got to talk about my books, right? Nadia and Aiden is available paperback. Kindle Unlimited. I saw recently somebody read 6 cents worth of Nadia and Aiden on Kindle Unlimited. So I don't know how many pages that is, maybe 13 pages, but I get 6 cents for that. So just keep that in mind. If you have Kindle Unlimited and you open up one of my books, and even if you don't read the whole thing, however many pages you read, I get some compensation for that. And even if it's only 6 cents, if 5 people did 6 cents worth, I get 30 cents. And I don't know what 30 cents gets me nowadays in the current economy. But, you add up, if you do that over the course of a year, right, that's $3.60. And $3.60 is a lot better than nothing, I think. So, hey, pop on there. If you've got Kindle Unlimited, open up Nadia and Aiden and do 13 or 14 pages worth, and I'll get my 6 cents based on that. So every little bit helps for sure. Also, my other novels are available if you go to my author page, which the link is here in the podcast description. Don's House in the Mountains, that's the one that came out last year. Nadia and Aiden came out last year. We're already like almost to when my next book will come out. But 2 years ago, 2023, Don's House in the Mountains, that's one people have enjoyed as well, if you want to check that one out too. And then, in terms of my next book, Mark and Sales looks like it's going to be the next one. So if you've read Chad and Accounting, Mark and Sales is in that same kind of universe as that. It's the same insurance company that Chad worked for. Mark is a huge salesperson for them. And essentially what happens is he's working for this health insurance firm, and he's making his way up the corporate ladder, making a ton of money, but he starts to kind of question it because, it's health insurance. And the company that he works for is particularly bad. They don't, they deny a lot of claims. They don't allow a lot of providers in network, a lot of those kinds of things. But Mark makes a ton of money. He sells his cut rate insurance to as many people as possible, and he's making out really well. But then he starts to kind of have a crisis of conscience as the book goes on. So, it was a really fun one to write. And, hopefully people will enjoy that. Look for that. I'm hoping November, December. That's what I'm looking for. But, again, watch this space and keep an eye out for when that next book comes out. The other thing is, if you go to my Amazon author page, if you follow me on my Amazon author page, you'll know when my next book comes out. So that makes it easier. I mean, of course, if you listen to this podcast, right, when my next book comes out, because I'm going to tell you about it every cold open. So anyway, so we're already almost at 10 minutes here. So why don't we have John play on our theme song, and then when we come back, Sean Malloy from I Must Break This Podcast is on, and we are going to be talking about In Hell. DTVC podcast. As always, this is Matt here, and we are joined once again by Sean Malloy from I Must Break This podcast to talk some more Jean-Claude Van Damme. Welcome back, Sean.
Hey, thank you. This is a lot of fun. Can I just say it is pretty much an honor that you seem to always call me when it comes to talking the muscles from Brussels. And it's funny. You and I were talking about this the other day. But I guess I can kind of live vicariously through you and your pod because with mine being over, actually, and all of the episodes actually were pulled actually, which is kind of sad, but that's a whole other story. But you know how it is. Sometimes podcasting is that itch that you got to scratch once in a while, and I've kind of been toying with ideas, and I actually did consider doing one on Jean-Claude Van Damme because I don't think there is a podcast out there that looks at his films. I know that there have been over the years a few, but I don't think they're around anymore. So it's one thing that I kind of considered, but I guess now I don't have to since you always graciously allow me back on yours. So
yes, I love having you on to this sort of this continuing series of us just discussing Van Damme movies. I think it's been fantastic. I mean, I will say the one thing about your I Must Break This podcast, and if you did a similar approach to Van Damme that I like that my podcast doesn't do, is you talk to the people in the business and got some really fantastic interviews.
Oh, thank you. I mean, it was certainly. Obviously, it was a labor of love, and I was very. I looked at it as I was very blessed to have gotten to speak with as many as I did. Of course, I hoped that I would be able to nab the white whale, being Dolph himself, but that didn't happen, unfortunately. But it's all good. I got to speak with tons of directors and even his go-to stunt double, which was really really cool. And so, yeah, I mean, it was, if you had told me when I embarked on that I'd get to speak with, even Uwe Boll was crazy, you know what I mean? To get to chat with Uwe Boll and, I'm trying to think of who else I got to chat with, Giorgio Serafini and Natalie Byrne and, Robert Miano, which, I mean, he's had a storied career. So yeah, it was a lot of fun getting to, see that side of the business as well.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of them gave really, really like insightful, sort of answers, regarding the business that like things that I wouldn't have considered. I always talk about when you had Benjamin Sachs on, and he talked about like producing Seagal movies, but he also talked about working with Dolph. And I think one of the things he talked about, when he worked with Dolph on Stormcatcher, how the first thing that he recognized was that the military outfits weren't correct, but that the director wanted to use these incorrect ones because they look better on screen. But then Dolph kind of wanted like some inside information because Ben Sachs had served on certain elements of gear, tactical approach, things like that. And so it's always kind of interesting how some directors want to be as perfect as possible, and other directors are more about like, what does it look like? What is this going to how will it come through to the audience?
Yeah, but I mean, as I'm sure you can attest, when you kind of get a behind the scenes look at these direct to video productions, they are quite different than these huge $1 billion Marvel productions where you don't even know where the money seems to be coming in from on those, as opposed to something. I remember talking with Michael Worth when he was promoting Wanted Man, which was Dolph's. He directed that one and wrote it and started and everything. And it's a fine movie. It's competently made, but you look at the behind the scenes stuff of that one, and it's like one guy behind a camera and then one dude holding the boom mic, and then and then you see what's going on like on a shoot like Aquaman, and it's not even pennies to dollars. It's something completely different.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. Because I think of like again going back to the Ben Sachs interview where he would the distributors would come to him and say, hey, here's this script, here's this movie. How much do you think you could make it for? And he would say, well, I can make it for $5 million. And they're like, okay, make it for $3 million and you're good. It's like, okay, that's like whereas the Marvel movies, like you said, it's like, oh, we're going to spend $250 million just on Robert Downey Jr. and the Russo brothers. Forget like everything else.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, but looking at the film that we're looking at today, it was really fun for me to go back and look at this one because I think we've said this before, but back in 2003, yes, Van Damme was starring in these films that did not have the budgets of maybe what he had been working with prior, especially when he was with Universal. Okay. But it's one of those things where you look back upon it and you're like, man, like we really didn't know how good we had it
Yes.
then. You know what I mean? Like we honestly didn't. I mean, and nowadays, you'll have a film come out with like, has like four name stars peppered throughout it, and so you think, oh wow, this is, this has Robert De Niro and Chad Michael Murray and all these various names, and then you find out that they're barely really going to be on screen. They're certainly not going to be sharing the screen at the same time, and it's going to take place all in one warehouse, where they're all shooting at each other for reasons that don't really make a whole lot of sense. As opposed to something like this, like In Hell. Yes, it was working with a smaller budget. Yes, it was filmed in Eastern Europe. That's very much clear, but there's still a level of polish to it that we don't see anymore, that we don't get nowadays. You know what I'm saying? And so it's like I said, it makes me feel bad that back then we were looking upon it and kind of dumping on some of these films. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I mean, In Hell, what we're going to be talking about here today, I mean, I definitely, when I wrote my review, I didn't like it because I wanted, I wanted Dolph, doing the splits and roundhouse kicking people and all that kind of. I wanted the flashy martial arts. I wanted Double Team, right, more than I wanted In Hell. Whereas I come back to watching In Hell now, and I kind of knew my taste had changed a bit, that I probably was going to see this one differently, and I appreciate it now that this was a movie where Van Damme said, no, I'm not going to do the splits. I'm not going to do the roundhouse kicks and all of that stuff. I think what his fighting acumen brings to this movie is that when he's getting beaten up by other people, he can sell it better. And that's a very different kind of movie from what he was doing. And again, I think we've talked about this, that, I'm doing the Seagal movies with Scott Murphy from All 90s Action. And it's like with the Seagal movies, he just keeps leaning into more and more of the Seagal thing. Whereas Van Damme's like, oh yeah, I want to do something different. Oh, Ringo Lam's got this thing for me that's completely different from what I usually do. Yeah, let me do that.
Well, that's a really good segue because this one, I remember when this one was in production, and it had a lot of really promising aspects about it that I think we can just go into. The first one is that Ringo Lam directed it, and I think you and I have talked about this before. I honestly think that Van Damme, some of his best work is, I think this is actually with any actor, to be perfectly honest, when they have a really accomplished director at the helm who you can tell that the actor has a real admiration and respect for, then yeah, it's kind of like lightning in a bottle. That director is able to get so much more out of the actor. You know what I'm saying? And so when it came to Van Damme, yeah, I mean, he had, at this point when this film was in production, Van Damme had already established a relationship with Ringo Lam. Their first film together was Maximum Risk, which is, which is a fine movie. It's not one of Van Damme's best, but then after that they did Replicant, which we're not going to go down that rabbit hole again, but you and I talked about it. I think Replicant is a lot of fun. So when I heard that he was going to be once again reteaming with Ringo Lam, and Ringo Lam, I mean, can we just say, has an amazing pedigree of films from Hong Kong. You know what I mean? He kind of his movies came out around the same time as John Woo. So I mean, as the John Woo films in Hong Kong, so they kind of had that same kind of lineage there. So when this was in production, and I kind of saw the behind the scenes, and I vividly remember seeing the 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 production, like pre-sales art that was being shopped around for this one. It was pretty exciting because I mean, like I said, Ringo Lam was great, and also it was a different Van Damme. You know what I mean? That's what's kind of funny if you look back upon it in hindsight. But I mean, this was Van Damme playing very very dark, very very morose, very very sad. You know what I mean? We hadn't really seen Jean Claude play a depressed burnout who's on the verge of suicide. You know what I mean? So that right there was pretty intriguing. Who would have thought that 20 years later that is all he would be playing anymore? But at the time, at the time, him playing morose and just depressed and quiet and everything, that was a revelation.
No, you're absolutely correct. I mean, I totally agree there because even when you think about some of those movies, like I just, I brought up Double Team, it's like a movie like that where he's in prison, and he's like, he's being held in somewhere, but there's still like this levity to it. Uh, Another one I think about was Death Warrant, of course, which takes place in a prison.
Mhm.
And Death Warrant is very much a 90s big budget action movie. And it plays like a 90s big budget action movie. Whereas this movie, this is the kind of thing that, like, I think if you brought this to the studios in the 90s, if Ringo Lam brought this to the studios in the 90s, they would have been like, okay, how do we make this lighter? How do we, there's a whole bunch of things in this movie that happen that would not pass for a Hollywood, a Hollywood blockbuster. You wouldn't see any of them in here. And I think, it's a, like you said, it's a very different kind of Van Damme, but I think the fact that he does it, and, looking at his career at that time, he had done a couple movies between this one and Replicant. He did Derailed, I did The Order, those are the two, Derailed and The Order, which, I'm not saying they're good or bad movies, but they're kind of more in line with, sort of what you would think a direct-to-video Van Damme movie would be. And I kind of wonder if Van Damme looked at it and said, when Ringo Lam came to him and he was like, yes, let me get out, let me do something different again.
But I think I think we alluded to this as well when we were chatting Replicant. I think, when it comes to Jean-Claude's career, I don't think he was, I don't think any actor is like, oh yes, I'm leaving the world of box office, of working with Universal Studios, and I'm now going into the world of direct to video. You know what I mean? But I think with Van Damme, it was in a lot of ways kind of a blessing, because I think his acting, I've said this before and I'll continue preaching it, but I think his acting managed to get much, much better over the years, especially in these lower rent productions. And he was dabbling and trying different genres and new things that he had not been doing, prior. You know what I mean? I mean, we talked about a bit in Replicant, he plays a clone. And then The Order is pretty much kind of a bizarre slapstick comedy in some ways. Derailed was purely a paycheck job, but there's moments in Derailed where he's really, really emoting. And his son in real life, Chris Van Bornberg, actually plays his son in that movie. And then he did this film where he just gets really, really down and dirty, and he grows out a beard and long hair. And then later on in the movie, he has like this kind of goatee kind of thing, you know what I mean? And his hair is slicked back. I mean, he's adopting a new look. And so that's one thing I got to give him, major credit for, because you look at a guy like Seagal. I mean, look, we can go on for days about Seagal and where, and his ego and where, his career kind of fell apart. But I mean, with a lot of these actors, it's got to be a real blow to your ego to be starring in a film that, was made for ostensibly between 30 to 55 million. And suddenly you're going to a direct to video thing that's being made for, barely 6 to 7 million. You know what I mean? Like that, to be fair, that has to really suck. But I mean, I'm going to say it, Van Damme, he always came to play in these lower rent productions, especially the ones that came in that early to mid 2000s period. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, no, I totally do. And one thing about In Hell that I didn't catch before, I guess because I didn't really know a lot about Van Damme's personal life, but interesting that he remarries his first wife, I think, right, in '99, and so right around the time that he starts doing some of these movies again, and I wonder if there's sort of meant to be like I don't know, or not his first wife, sorry, his third wife. It's actually his third wife, but he's the one that he'd had his two kids with, Bree and Chris, but he gets back together with her, with Gladys, and I wonder if this movie was supposed to somewhat reflect a little bit of that, where the character goes through this metamorphosis where he loses his wife and then he essentially gets her back in a way, kind of spiritually. And I wonder if just mentally he was in a different state. I mean, I think we've talked before about like, he was definitely, living it up in the 90s, and probably a little bit too hard. And I wonder if he got a little bit more grounded when, maybe after Universal Soldier of the Return doesn't do so, or not. I think it's the Return, right? The 99 one. That one doesn't do so well. And maybe he just sort of resets himself and says, okay, this is what I'm doing now. This is a new start for me. I'm back with my wife. And he's still with her. They've been married all this time. I wonder if it created this thing in him. And again, it's completely different from Seagal, Seagal has just always been Seagal all these years. I mean, he's put on weight and all that stuff, but he's still the same, whereas Van Damme, it's almost like he's not trying to recapture any glory. He's more like, I had that glory one time. I also made mistakes during that period of time, and I'm sort of correcting those mistakes and just kind of, moving forward. It's like a more mature Van Damme, I think.
I would agree with that. And I think in some ways that it kind of hurts this film to an extent, because I mean, how do I say this? I feel like when you're an action star, you know what I mean? When your bread and butter is made based on, these action films, and as well as this kind of aura you've created about yourself, then when you come into a film, okay, whether it be a comedy, or how do I say this? When you go into a film that is not 100% action, okay, that has a little more comedy in it, or maybe is more of a drama, well, when you're an action star, there's certain expectations, I think, that the audience expects from the product, from the film, right? And I will say that I think, and this is really weird to say this, and I really noticed it on this viewing, but I almost feel that the fighting aspect of this film almost kind of hurts it and weighs it down, because I remember when this was being shopped around, okay, and I don't know if, I mean, I'd really like to look at the original scripts and things like that, but I don't know if you felt this way, but I look at this as being a more of a prison drama. You know what I mean? It is because with everything that happens to Van Damme, I mean, my God, he really does go through hell in this film. I mean, there's scenes where multiple scenes actually, where he tries to take his own life. You know what I mean? I mean, this is a very hardcore, depressing, I think we could say, prison movie, where these prison yard fights are almost thrown in, and they almost feel, in some ways, kind of ancillary. You know what I mean? They almost feel like like you can almost take them out of the film, and the film is almost going to play just fine, I think. I almost kind of wonder if, when Jean-Claude became attached to it, they decided, let's throw in some requisite fight scenes. You know what I mean? He pretty much learns how to adapt to the prison system by becoming a badass fighter. And I don't know if you felt this way or not, but I always felt, and I really noticed it on my recent viewing, like I said, the fight scenes really do seem like an afterthought. They are not at the forefront, like I think this film was promoted on, if that makes any sense at all.
No, no, it totally does. Because one of the things I was wondering about is so in real life in America, in the United States, so there's a film that came out in '08 called Felon. I don't know if you've heard of that one with Stephen
Yep.
Dorff. And, yeah,
I
right.
was just thinking that one.
Yeah, and so that's based off
Yep.
a real thing. And so it was a Corcoran State Prison where it happened. And so actually, no, this was in the this was it looks like it was in the '90s. It was in like the late '90s where this might have happened. So I wonder if they also yeah, oh, actually, no, it was right around the time. It was yeah, late '90s, early 2000s. I wonder if the scriptwriters, like you said, they had this prison drama, and then they hear about these fights going on, and if they thought, oh, could we put these things together? It's like this is in the headlines now. It's a current event thing, so it's like almost like, yeah, like to your point, like Van Damme, we can have the fights in here. This is a current event thing. It'll like make the movie more current or something like that too. And like you said, though, it went against the rest of the film because it added some really odd elements between like the fact that Van Damme has to kind of learn how to fight, and when he was just a regular guy who gets thrown in the situation. The way the gangs were organized for the fights were kind of all over the place. I mean, eventually it becomes more of a stronger piece of the film, but yeah, I think to your point, I think somebody saw this script, saw prison drama, and said, "What can we add to it to make it more like relevant to the DTV market?"
Especially once Jean-Claude Van Damme became attached. I honestly think that that's what happened. Once they saw that he was attached, that Ringo Lam was attached, they were kind of like, okay, yeah, you can get your prison drama, Ringo Lam and Jean-Claude. Fine. Jean-Claude, you want to emote and you really want to show some acting? Fine. But I think they also kind of realized, but you have a market, you have an audience. Let's also throw in some fight scenes, because I mean, what's really interesting is I feel like if this had come out in the '90s, I feel like the fighting would have been so much more front and center of the film, especially if you think about it. The way, I mean, look, the Michael Bailey Smith. Let's just get to that.
Yes.
But Michael Bailey Smith is this big, bad, huge white supremacist badass. Okay, he's pretty much going to be the final boss, if you will, that Jean-Claude is going to have to fight. Okay, and I feel like if this had come out in the '90s, for example, yeah, they would have been building up to that scene with Michael Bailey Smith and everything. Here, he just kind of shows up on screen, and then the final fight between he and Michael Bailey Smith is really, I don't want to say it's lackluster. I mean, I'm kind of going back and forth on this, and I hope that I hope what I'm trying to say it makes sense at all. But I feel like because the film is being so realistic in terms of being this prison drama, as a result, the fight scenes are also more realistic and not as fantastic as they would have been, in the 90s, like the Quest or something of that nature. You know what I mean? And so I remember seeing this for the first time, and I remember thinking that the final fight between he and Michael Bailey Smith, especially the way they were building it up, almost kind of comes off as a little lackluster. And if I remember right, is yeah, it's not as fantastical. But I think if you look at this as being a prison drama, you know what I mean, and not a full on action film, then I think some of those lackluster fights are excusable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I feel like if this was, a real prison fight that was going on in the real world, then I think it would look pretty similar. You know what I mean? You wouldn't get those jump spin kicks that Van Damme is known for and things of that nature. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, no, and I think there's other kind of more brutal aspects of this film that I don't think we would have gotten in a '90s drama. I mean, the character of Billy, Chris Moore, the sort of this young kid who, the story behind his character is that he is traveling. He's sort of backpacking through Europe. He ends up in Russia. He's hanging out with a young woman. She gets drunk and she drives her car into a building, and he gets a year and a half in prison for damage to property or something like that, which sounds about par for the course in Russia. But, he ends up in this prison, and immediately the guards essentially pimp him out. That's the best way to describe it. And they get graphic with the very first scene, where it's kind of this one big baddie who Van Damme ends up beating up in one of the fights, or ends up killing in one of the fights. But it's extremely graphic. It's the kind of thing that generally prison movies in America, or any kind of, they allude to the concept of this thing happening, but they never actually go that far with it. It's almost like it's alluded at certain points. Here, Ringo Lam's like, no, this is happening. This is what's going on in this movie. And again, it doesn't pull any punches with the brutality.
No. I mean, this. I remember seeing this for the first time, and it was, like I said, it was a different Van Damme than I had ever seen. I mean, and I mean, let's just say it: the fact that the muscles from Brussels, as he's known, right? The guy with the jump spin kick and the splits, the one that we all grew up idolizing throughout the movies, or excuse me, throughout the '90s, is in a film that is depicting prison rape, is pretty unsettling. You know what I mean? But you got to hand it to him. I mean, I think all of these action stars are actors first in a lot of ways, and so I think this was his opportunity to really show audiences that he could do more than just the kicks. And I think on that end, it certainly delivers. You know what I mean? I guess I don't. I know I keep going back and forth on this, and I sound bizarre saying that I didn't like it or whatever, but I mean that wasn't the case at all. I do think it is a fine movie. It is competently made. Everything about it. It's just I feel like I went into it expecting something different, and a lot of what I went into expecting was because it was a Van Damme movie. When in the end, I think he wanted to kind of go against that. And as I look back upon it now, all these years removed, I think I appreciate it because it's Van Damme delivering something I think that was a little bit different. You know what I mean? Like, what is it they say? Hindsight is 20/20. And so in hindsight, I look upon it and I think it was a very daring, bold role for him to do. But at the time, it was much, much different than I think what audiences had expected from him, if that makes sense at all.
No, it totally does. And I felt the same way. I mean, I said I didn't like the movie when I reviewed it. I believe it was in '07 when I reviewed it. I didn't like it then. I wanted more death warrant. That's what I wanted. And I think that's what I even said in the review. I was like, yeah, that end fight scene against the Sandman, Patrick Kilpatrick, where, I remember watching that with my friends. One of them had a birthday around that time. It was like a sleepover for his birthday. And we were watching Death Warrant. And, the Sandman comes out of the furnace and he's got, he's on fire on his arms and stuff like that. And he goes under the ground and rolls over to kind of put himself out. And one of my friends watching was like, "Oh, yep, he knows the drill, right? Stop, drop, and roll." It's like,
yeah.
It was like kind of a fun thing. I mean, I definitely would not be watching. I mean, we were probably, Death Warrant, we would have been like maybe like, 6th, 7th grade, something like that. This is not In Hell is definitely not a 6th or 7th grade movie. Yeah, I mean, it's that now as I'm older, I think there's a couple reasons why I've coming back to it on this watch that I like it better than I did when I watched it. And I think it was in '07. I believe I watched it. So that would be like, what, 18 years ago now. I think one is that, like, I'm a little bit more mature when it comes to watching movies. I am okay with, Van Damme taking a chance and wanting to do something. I respect it more that he did that. I think that that's one thing. But I think also, to your point, this is a Millennium film, so this is the Millennium guys making this. I take a movie that I watched recently, 211, that I watched for the podcast with Nicolas Cage. That's also a Millennium film. They're like night and day, and this movie takes place all pretty much in one location, but yet the polish on this movie and the way this movie feels compared to that 211 movie that was all shot on the Millennium Studios lot that they have there in Bulgaria. They're completely different movies, and so it's like part of it is that in 2007, I think it's so. Yes, I reviewed this in May of 2007, so over 18 years ago. At that time, we were only this movie was 4 years removed from that, but we had a different understanding of what the quality of DTV is. And I guess if I had known what the market was going to be like 18 years later, I would have been like, oh, In Hell is great, but I have a new appreciation for it now.
Yeah, yeah. The one thing we haven't talked about that I would like to touch upon about this film that I got to give it real credit for too, which is really interesting. But I remember when this came out to DVD, I don't know if you remember this or not, but this came out in November of 2003. Okay. And this was released to DVD on the same day as X-Men 2, X-Men United.
Oh, I didn't know that. No.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember because I actually have a buddy who worked at a Hollywood Video at the time. But I remember a couple things. Obviously, if you remember the Sunday ads, okay, back when stores sold DVDs, they would have all the upcoming releases that were being released on that Tuesday. And I remember Best Buy, Circuit City, all of those. In Hell was front and center with all of the other upcoming releases that were going to be coming out here in a couple days, right? And right next to X-Men 2, X-Men United was In Hell. And so needless to say, I remember going to the store, buying a copy of X-Men and buying a copy of In Hell. But my buddy who worked at a Hollywood Video, I remember him saying that like they were renting just as many copies, if not more, of In Hell than they were X-Men. You know what I mean? Like, and isn't that wild to think that there was a time, just to show you how big the direct-to-video market was. But yeah, while Van Damme, maybe he wasn't as big as he once was, here he had this scrappy little dark direct-to-video movie that came out, and it was giving, a big budget film like X-Men a run for the money in terms of rentals. Isn't that, I look back upon that, upon that now, and I think, man, that's actually kind of cool. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, because the other thing I think about is I saw, X-Men 2 in the theater. I remember, my friends and I, hey, we got to go see X-Men 2. We like the first one. Let's go see the second one. Whereas In Hell, obviously we didn't get that opportunity. And so I think that's another piece of it. X-Men 2 would have been in the theater much longer. Think about this past summer. How long was Superman in the theater before it went to digital? And 2 months maybe? Whereas like an X-Men 2.
Oh, I was just... Oh, cool. Yeah, no, sorry to interrupt you. I was just talking about this actually with the same friend.
Yeah.
Superman came out in mid-July. Within a month, it was available on demand if you wanted to pay $20 or whatever. And as of this recording, it is now on HBO Max.
Yeah.
So 2 months. It took just 2 months for it to, and I guess it did.
No, well, yeah. Superman, it did pretty good in the theater, right? I think it did like 600. One of the things that James Gunn said was that it didn't do as well as they were hoping because of sort of, with Trump, with the tariffs and all of those kinds of things. There was a sense sort of globally that people weren't interested in American products. And I think, that's one of those things. I think usually like when those movies get in the $1 billion range, they do slightly better globally than they do domestically, I guess. And they call domestically US and Canada. So he thinks that hurt the sales. I think also Fantastic Four coming out 2 weeks later probably may have hurt like people rewatching it, but it did, like you said, it did well enough. I don't know if they had let it stay in the theater for the whole summer or for like another month or two. If it would have done well, if it would have had a rebound or something. In the past, it didn't seem to matter. Like it was like, okay, Attack of the Clones. I remember being in the I saw it in the theater like in May of '02. Went home, saw it with my friends, and I remember even like late in the summer, like August, September, it was still in the theater, and my buddy and I could go watch it. And then we saw it in IMAX in December of that year. So I mean, you don't see anything like that happen anymore.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But I mean, yeah, I mean, I just like I said, I'm very nostalgic for this period,
Yeah.
and I think it's pretty cool that that there was a time where direct to video stuff had money in it, had money pumped into them, had decent budgets considering, with stars that could pony up and rival a big budget release going to DVD. I mean, and that's the thing too. I remember hearing an interview with Matt Damon. He would talk about this. Even if the movie didn't do very well at the box office, when it came to DVD, they could recoup a lot of those losses. You know what I mean? And it was almost like kind of reopening the movie again. And so yeah, a lot of studios would bank on that, and that's why back in those early 2000s, you certainly had much more dramas that went theatrical, as well as comedies. You know what I mean? We don't see comedies go theatrical anymore because they don't think they're going to get their money back. You know what I mean? So that's why a lot of what comes out is kind of all the same. But again, it's cool that in 2003, not only did the cinema landscape look much different in terms of theaters, but the direct to video market was just awesome. And Van Damme was, he was able to capitalize on that, at the right time.
Yeah, yeah, and like IMDb lists the budget for this as 17 million. I think what they did is I think sometimes when the budgets are listed, they roll in the advertising into it, and sometimes they don't. And I almost wonder if maybe this was, I don't know what your thoughts are, but maybe like 5 or 6, maybe 7 million is what the budget was, and then usually it's like 3 times the budget is the advertising or something like that, or something. I don't know exactly, but I wonder if I can't imagine this movie cost 17 million. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much possible. I mean, the cool thing about this is it is a prison set, so it's working with that prison location.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But what's really cool about it is, I mean, okay, if you want to compare this, for example, to some of the prison movies that Dolph Lundgren did within the past 10 years,
Right.
okay, he did two. He did Riot, and then he did Larceny.
Yeah.
Okay, both of those films have just like, I mean, you can't even compare those to In Hell. I mean, I mean, those are working with minuscule budgets. I think Riot maybe had like one cell, but then it has like one open like cafeteria area, and then same thing with Larceny. I remember Larceny, is working with something pretty similar. But with In Hell, I mean, you have that big open yard area. You have multiple cells that we see. I mean, you have the dungeon that the Van Damme goes down into. That's the one where he, has the hallucinations and where he makes some attempts on his life and everything. I mean, so I think in a lot of ways this is working with a much broader scale. You know what I mean? In a lot of respects.
Well, and you bring up Riot as a great example because you look on the cover of Riot and you see what is supposed to be a huge a movie where Dolph Lundgren and Chuck Liddell have a big standoff against each other, but actually no, the movie's starring Matthew Rhys and he's doing all the heavy lifting, and Dolph is mopping, and he's pretending to be developmentally delayed to be undercover, while Chuck Liddell's got a Russian accent, and it's like that's the other thing about In Hell, is that In Hell you're getting your money's worth, at least with Van Damme. Maybe he's not doing the martial arts you want, but he's in the movie the whole time. I mean, I don't know how many pages of script Dolph did in Hell, but it wasn't anywhere near the amount that Van Damme does here.
No, absolutely not. I mean, and like again, you look at this and you think, okay, a lot has changed in 20 years, but I mean, man, you look at something like In Hell, which would you say the budget was, or reported 17 million?
It says 17 million. Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I guess it said it grossed 300,000 worldwide, so it was released internationally in a few places, but that's what it says on IMDb.
Okay. I mean, compared to something like Darkness of Man or whatever, which is barely working with 1 to 2 million. Like, isn't that just wild how much? I mean, normally you'd think that the budgets would be going up
Right.
as the years go on, but no, they're just getting, slashed to where they're working with nothing, to where, I mean, I don't know if offers are still coming, to Van Damme, but to be honest, you look at it and you think like, well, you can't blame him if he is looking at the market and saying, you know what, I'm okay not working anymore. It's not worth my time. You know what I mean? And it saddens me to say that, but if that is the case, then I don't blame him. You know what I mean?
No, no, exactly. Because I mean, with the budgets being slashed, like I mean, to your point about what where these things could make money, this idea that you could make money in the secondary market on DVD. Also, Van Damme, Seagal, and Dolph, they all, their movies all had distribution, deals with like USA Pictures and I think Spike TV, which would show them as well. So it was like the money that you could make. Now it's like I guess you make like in Darkness with Darkness of Man, and I guess it's like Hulu must pay a certain number for the movie, and then you get the Amazon VOD, and then I guess if it's on Hulu, if it's the ad version, do they get a percentage of the ads, or does Hulu just give them a straight number and say that's what you get? Because I think we've talked about this before, we don't really know what success means for these movies anymore. What how you make any money back if you're on Tubi or whatever. Whereas back then they knew exactly where their money was. You had however many Hollywood videos and blockbusters around the country that you knew were going to buy 10 copies of a Van Damme movie. And you knew USA Pictures was going to pay a certain number to be able to premiere the movie on that station. So they had these numbers set up. Now it's like this thing, and the streamers they change their rates and their compensation structure. It's like, again, to your point, Van Damme probably looks at. I mean, he makes kind of big budget movies, I think, in France sometimes still, because it's like, what are you going to do here in America?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, and to, put this in perspective, okay, in hell, I see this playing all the time. We have one of those, we have a Roku TV,
Oh yes.
okay? And so the Roku TVs are pretty much preloaded with all of these channels that play content, free content, I should say. There are ads that run through them, but for the most part, there are free. There's, it's a bunch of channels with free content, I guess we can say. Um, and not only is In Hell available on every free streaming service around, we can say, I know it's on Hoopla, I know it's on Tubi, I know it's on a few others, but there are a couple channels called Film Rise
Oh
Action, and
yes.
film, whatever. And In Hell is like one of the stock titles that is played all the time. And so it's, I don't know, on one hand, it's kind of cool, you know what I mean? That I can turn on my, I always joke about this with my wife, but I can turn on the Roku TV and I'm guaranteed to find either a Schwarzenegger film, a Dolph Lundgren film, or a Van Damme film at any time of the day, anytime I turn it on. But on the other hand, it's kind of like wow, like all of these films that took Van Damme and all of these, pretty much everybody, Ringo Lam, the production crew, everybody who put sweat, time, and tears into these films, that now they're being looked at as nothing more than content. You know what I mean? To fulfill a quota that's gonna be played from between 2 in the morning to 3:30 in the morning. You know what I mean? For free, we should say. It really does cheapen, um, not just the movie, but the entire brand in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like thinking about growing up and like the 80s and 90s on a weekend where it would just be like 70s TV movies or like Hong Kong films or things like that they would just use to fill content on the weekends. And now these movies, like you say, that from '03, which again, in the late 2000s, USA, because back then USA, I mean, I don't even know if they were owned by NBC Universal at that time or if they were still independent, but they didn't just air Fast and Furious movies and Law and Order reruns and I guess they do EPL games. There was a time when USA Network, and they would have Van Damme movies on all day and Dolph Lundgren movies. I mean, Blackjack was premiered on USA, and now, like you said, those channels don't do that anymore. But now it's like the Roku channel or Pluto. Pluto also has channels like that, and like you said, these things, they're just kind of content there. And I guess on some levels, in a way, for these movies, they made their money, so they can look at it as like, okay, anything we make now is extra. But like, yeah, if you're Van Damme and you're like, okay, well, at least when I made In Hell, there was like advertising behind it, there was a push behind it, there was money in the movie. Whereas, like, yeah, if he's looking at movies now, I mean, like you said, maybe he's just doing it for the love of making movies. But if he's got enough money, and I don't think there's any reason for us to believe that he ran out of money. That I don't think he was, hard up. I don't think he spent all of his money or anything like that. I wonder, yeah, what would the impetus be for him to keep making these movies?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, we also have to recognize the fact that he is in his 60s now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, I mean, that's the kind of unfortunate truth that we also have to recognize is while the direct video market was big and he was able to capitalize it and he was working with smaller budgets,
Yeah.
he was also, still relatively young and in his early 40s or whatever, right? And so he was able to kind of maybe give a little bit more to a lot of these films, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like this conversation I've kind of flipped and flopped back and forth. You know what I mean? But I will say I think it's a fine movie. It's competently made. It's Jean-Claude doing something kind of like with Replicant.
Yes.
It's him doing something that he had not done before. And it is quite dark, similar to Replicant. Actually, it is very, very dark and morose in a lot of parts. But it's I don't want to say it's a fun movie, but it is. I think it does have a lot going for it. But like I said, I just want to stress too, how ironic is it and bizarre is it that when this came out, it was giving us, I think the meme I've seen online is sad damn,
Right.
because in a lot of his films he just plays, so beaten down, morose, where he doesn't talk much. You know what I mean? And so I remember when this came out, it was like, wow, like coming from something like The Order, where he was goofy and silly and wearing a Hasidic Jew costume, and he's running around Israel and everything like that. And then you come to something like this, where he's, beating his head against the side of a dungeon. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, wow. But how ironic is it that 15 years later, every one of his movies, he would be pretty much working at this exact same speed, maybe even more depressed and sad.
Yeah, well, because I think the one thing that he's done that I don't know if any of the other stars have done. I mean, I think Stallone is a great example of this. They none of them have really accepted aging the way that it seems like he doesn't. It starts, I think, with JCVD, where I mean, he even says he does this big long one take scene, and he's like, "I'm 50 years old. I'm too old to do these one take scenes like this. Or I'm almost 50," and I think that's the one thing with him that you get more than you get from some of the other ones. I guess Mark Dacascos is another one, because he even plays people that are older than like he was born in the 60s. He'll play people that are born in the 50s. So Mark Dacascos is maybe another one who's like aged well, like he's accepted aging, and I think that's also one of the things where as a character who's becoming more introspective and accepting aging more, that for whatever reason that tends to lend itself to being angry and depressed or whatever in these movies. The introspection, I guess, lends itself to that.
I mean, conversely, yeah, I would agree with you. It's interesting if you look at Jean-Claude in the later years. I mean, his face has become much more weathered.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the wrinkles and the kind of craggly lines and everything like that, and his face is much more weathered. So I guess you could argue that he is leaning much more into his appearance by taking on a lot of these roles. So I guess that's one way of looking at it. I would argue, I mean, I have some theories that I don't want to fully go into, but I mean, he's gone on the record saying that he has suffered from bipolar depression and things of that nature, and he's also, I mean, it's not a secret, but he's had baggage with years of drug use and things like that. So I do kind of wonder. I actually did speak with Patrick Kilpatrick in an episode of my show years ago, and he flat out said that he looks at Jean-Claude as being kind of a tragic figure, because the years of drug abuse played their toll on him, and it was not the same Van Damme when he did Blackwater with Van Damme back in, I think, 17, I want to say that was. He kind of alluded that that was not the same Van Damme that he had worked with when he did Death Warrant. And so I almost kind of wonder if one of the reasons, and again, I'm just purely speculating, Matt. I'm not a doctor, I'm not an expert, but I do kind of wonder if when we see him playing morose and things like that, if maybe, I don't know, if maybe that's like him being a little more medicated on set, you know what I mean? Or something of that nature. Because, or it could, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, it could just be the fact that a lot of these productions now are working with pennies, and he's only on set for a couple days, and maybe he looks at it as being not worth his time. So he's like, look, I'm not gonna give my best effort if the production is not there 100% in its A game. It could be that as well.
Well, because I think if you look at a movie like The Last Mercenary that he does in France in 2021, it seemed like he was having a much better time with that movie. He's kind of just yucking it up and kind of rolling with the French humor in that film and all of that. Whereas, like again, like A Darkness of Man, I mean, again, that character is supposed to be more morose too, but yeah, I mean, I can see, he's in a movie like that, and they're doing everything on the cheap as much as possible. The story's kind of all over the place. It's sort of, they're trying to figure out how to mitigate all of these different things. I'm sure he looks back at a movie that he does with Ringo Lam and says, okay, I work with this director. We're really good friends. We know each other's styles. He lets me do something I've never done before. And yeah, I mean, I kind of wonder, like, Blackwater, I think, is another great one to think about, because I remember when that one came out, it was like, can you imagine a Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren movie coming out with less fanfare than that movie? Like, that should have been like the movie of the year for us direct-to-video fans. And it kind of just came out. It just kind of was there.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, it really did. It kind of, in a lot of ways, it came a little bit too late in some respects, because that both guys were so much older. But on the other hand, it's kind of like, man, like you would think that they could have, put a little bit more effort or something in there in that one. That one, I actually wrote an essay about that one, not to promote my own stuff, but there's a book called Blood Spurt that you can find on Amazon, and I did actually write an essay about Blackwater. And yeah, I mean that one is a lot of it is a missed opportunity, because you'd think that having these two titans reteamed once again, but this time where they're on the same side, yeah, you think like, man, like this should be a Tango and Cash type dynamic. Okay, it's going to be amazing. But unfortunately, they don't share enough time on screen. And when they are on screen together, it's way too quick. And Van Damme is once again playing, kind of morose and burnt out and tired. You know what I mean? And so it's kind of like, man, like, but then again, honestly, I think that one is an interesting one, because I think the script was already written, and Jean-Claude and Dolph were pretty much pigeonholed and shoehorned into it when they realized that they were available, and they just didn't have the time to rewrite it and make it, and they didn't have time to rewrite something that could cater more to their strengths and what we know. So, they had cameras ready to go, and the submarine set was only available from Monday to Friday. You know what I mean? So they kind of had to do with what they could. But yeah, that one was a real kind of botched opportunity, unfortunately.
Well, and that's maybe another area where In Hell is good, right? Is that we talked about maybe the fight element might have been shoehorned into the script, and maybe there was a sense of like, oh, we've got Van Damme too, so let's have this fight element in the script. But overall, the movie feels like Ringo Lam and Van Damme put this movie, like it feels like it was a movie where they knew in advance that Van Damme was going to be in this movie, and they made it, for him, or I guess in that sense, I mean, I don't know, maybe Van Damme read the script and he liked the script, and they just kind of made the movie, but it wasn't the same thing, right? It's not like like you said, like a studio just pulling scripts out of the vault and being like, what can we do with this? Oh well, these guys are available, great, let's make it with them. But In Hell doesn't have that vibe to it.
No, yeah, no, but 30 days to shoot at least. You know what I mean? And that's something else that we don't get nowadays. Nowadays, a lot of these films, especially with Jean-Claude or whatever, especially Dolph Lundgren, I mean, he feels more like a commodity anymore, that, kind of like that website Cameo. You pay so much, and then you're going to get seconds to wish you a happy birthday. It feels like that's how a lot of these films are made now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They can afford golf for about 2-3 days. Well, they're gonna use him for about 2-3 days, but he's really not going to be in the film that much. You know what I mean? It's going to be more or less a fleeting cameo. In Hell, I feel like this had some time to shoot it. You know what I mean? And I think in the end, you can tell. And I kick myself again because I look back upon this in 2003 and I kind of thought, oh man, that's not the Van Damme I would have wanted. That's not, it's kind of lame and he's being sad and everything. It's not what I hopefully signed on for. Um, you look back upon it now compared to what we have nowadays, and it's like, man, like it was him emoting, it was him trying something new, playing a new character, multiple sets, multiple locations. It had to have triple the times of the budgets of films nowadays, as well as shooting time. You know what I mean? It had a lot more going for it than I think we um, than we knew. I think at the time, if we knew how bad it was going to get, maybe Van Damme fans and completists would have been a little more appreciative. But I will say it made bank in terms of rentals. Okay, I think a lot of people showed up because it was Van Damme doing something new, and so you got to give it credit for that as well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I remember going to like Blockbuster. I was trying to think. So Blockbuster was the one that was like kind of the next town over in the big strip mall area. 'Cause I think that's kind of that was part of Blockbuster's their business model, right? Is that they got prime locations, and that enabled them to squeeze out the mom and pops. But I think the mom and pop in our hometown was replaced by, I think, like a movie update or something like that. So they weren't as big, but they still had, again, you'd see 3 or 4 of the newest Van Damme movie, and then they would always have one copy of the older ones. So you could get any Van Dammes that you wanted, any Seagals, any Dolph Lundgrens. They were all there. And yeah, I mean, and when I watched this in '07, when I reviewed it in '07, Netflix Instant was just becoming a thing. It was, I remember, the Roku I had at that time, it was the block Roku that, the very first generation of the Roku. And I remember hooking it up to the TV and it didn't work. Like Netflix didn't work. None of it worked. And then I remember with my computer, I had to like upgrade my RAM to be able to run Instant on my computer. So it was like such in its infancy. But eventually it kind of sweeps through the industry and it makes rentals like, it kind of, made the whole concept of the rental completely changed. Now, physical media is something that you buy as a collector or as something to kind of, have, you want to have it there. And it's almost like a premium element. Do I want to own this movie? Am I just going to watch it? Do I just want to just stream it? Is which is worth it? Which again, I guess from the same point, when younger, you'd want to rent a movie versus buying it potentially too, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I don't think in '07 we could have seen the bottom falling out to the degree that it did. That like, with streaming now, I don't think streaming is. I'm kind of all over the place, but streaming isn't quite the same as like Spotify. Where Spotify you can get any song and listen to it. With streaming with movies, there still are a lot of movies that either aren't on a stream on any kind of streamer, or if they are, you can only rent them. They're not included in different packages, which makes it a little bit different compared to the other ones. And I don't know how that equates to money from the movie side. I don't know how that works for them, but at least it's a little bit more. I don't know. It's a little bit the commodity, or like it's not completely, the market isn't flooded with the movie. It's, I guess, in that sense, there's still some money to be had. I guess I'm not sure.
Well, and can we just say too, the other thing that I'm surprised we haven't talked about is the fact, I wonder how this came about,
Yeah.
but the fact that Lawrence Taylor
Right.
has a supporting role in this one.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I mean, and that's, I remember in what was it, I think it was 1999 when Any Given Sunday came out.
Yeah.
To theaters, and Lawrence Taylor has an amazing role in that. And I mean, at the time, no one really thought that Lawrence Taylor could act like that. That took, I think, a lot of audiences by surprise. But then he didn't show up in any other films. But then he shows up in this one, and he has a memorable presence in this one as well, where he plays his nickname is 451. You know what I mean? He's kind of the he's what is he? He's Jean Claude's he's his in what do you want to call it, his roommate, his
Yeah,
cellmate.
cellmate. Yeah.
But he's also the one who kind of gets to speak wisdom and talk wisdom into him as well. While also he's pretty much. It's funny you mentioned the movie Felon with Stephen Dorff and Val Kilmer, but he's basically playing a Val Kilmer role where
Yes.
he's a vicious human being and criminal, but there's a little bit of redemption in him, and he's going to help the lead hero, the main character, um, find some redemption within his soul as well. So I don't know, maybe perhaps Rick Romanois, when he wrote Felon, was looking at In Hell for inspiration. Would not surprise me actually, because the parallels are, now that we're talking about it, are very very similar.
Well, I wonder if this movie did pull the fight element from the Corcoran prison scandal, where they are actually having those fights, which is it's kind of crazy too. I mean, again, watching this movie that takes place in Russia, where they're depicting how horrible Russian prisons are, yet the things that they're depicting happen in American prisons. It's like, yeah, American prisons no walk in the park either. But I wonder, yeah, if they both were kind of pulling from that, and so then, yeah, there's those other elements that they decided to pull in there. I mean, yeah, I mean the Lawrence Taylor thing. You're right. It's like he plays this character. We don't know how he ends up in Russia. They show that I guess he had a teacher that tried to sexually assault him, and he set the teacher on fire. But that couldn't have been how he ended up in prison in Russia. I don't think. I don't know how that. We he's just there, and he's just doing what he's doing there. But it was an interesting character. I mean, I think he also had kind of demons and things that he was dealing with, that may have made it so he didn't do more acting roles. I mean, it's possible too that he just was making. He had enough money as a football player that he didn't want to do these low budget things. I'm not sure, but it's kind of just kind of out of nowhere. You're right that there's Lawrence Taylor in this movie.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. But I mean, he's great in the film. He's great in the
Yes.
film. I believe his name is escaping me, but character actor, is it Robert Lusardo?
Robert Lasar. Yes,
Also shows up as one of the inmates as well. So there's it's not just, I mean, it is a Van Damme movie, but there's also some familiar faces in here as well, kind of added to the mix.
yeah. Interesting group that they have. They have Robert Lasardo and then Paulo Taka. And it's interesting because most of the time, so Paulo Taka was the one who ran the other gang. So there's three gangs, right? There's kind of the main Russian mafia gang that has like the antagonists, and then you've got Robert Lasardo's gang, and then you've got Paulo Taka's gang, and those two almost are never in a movie together because they kind of fill up the same space. They kind of just do the same thing. So it was interesting having them in the movie together. We also had Juan Fernandez as sort of this trans character in the film, and
Hmm.
and I think these actors, I think they're also millennial mainstays, and so maybe that was part of it too. Is that they, the thing I think about this being a millennial film is that they looked at this as like a big film for them. We've got Van Damme in this movie. This is going to make us a lot of money. And I'm sure they were able to get these other names and say, hey, you want to be a part of this Van Damme movie where, this is going to be big for us. And to your point, I mean, it was out renting X2 when it came out. So I think it was as successful as they wanted it to be.
Yeah, definitely. The other actor we need to mention, Carlos Gomez,
Yes.
who plays the head guard. He's actually more, I would argue, he's actually the main antagonist. Certainly more of an antagonist than Michael Bailey Smith turns out to be, because he and Jean Claude's Kyle character have a real disdain for one another, and you can't blame him because he steals Jean Claude's wedding ring or whatever. But I mean, he's not it's not like he's this, widely recognizable name, but he has a face that's pretty recognizable. I'm just looking up at a lot of the stuff that he's popped up in over the years. He played throughout the 90s. He played a lot of cop roles. Okay, guaranteed that you'd see him in a lot of films of the 90s where he was one of the cops on the precinct who maybe gets 3 to 4 lines. But I'm just looking at right now. He was in The Replacement Killers
Oh,
as one
right.
of the officers on the case. He was also in The Negotiator as one of the officers on the case, and then he had small roles in Desperado, and Fools Rush In, the Matthew Perry comedy where he's leaning into his Mexican American heritage. So yeah, I mean, you have some. I mean, I think we've kind of alluded to, but this film really does have a a great selection of character actors in it as well to kind of help round out the cast.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, yeah, I mean, Carlos Gomez, he's doing okay for himself now in this sort of this new television ecosystem of cop dramas. That
Hmm.
he's CBS seems to call him, I guess maybe every couple of years or so to do an NCIS or a Blue Bloods or something like that, which I think is great too. I think but at that time, direct to video stuff was a great way to make money, and especially with companies like Millennium that were really like again putting a lot of money behind things, but also distributors that were putting money behind these as well. It was it's interesting to think about the Millennium guys because that's where Randall Emmett comes from. He learned under those guys, and I wonder if they already saw where the market was going. In the kind of the late 2000s when he starts to work under them on some Seagal movies and stuff, if they were starting to see where the market was going and he started seeing some of the techniques that they were using as the market was changing. Okay, put a big name on the tin, film it in a cheap area like Bulgaria. When the financial crisis happens here in America, suddenly Michigan, Louisiana end up being cheaper than Bulgaria. So they start shooting there as well. But kind of the cynicism that we see in a Randall Emmett film, you almost feel like maybe they picked it up from watching the Millennium guys try to make sense of the changing market in the late 2000s and early 2010s.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I'm gonna say it again, man. We didn't know then. And it does make me long for. I do wish, especially before Ringo Lam passed, I do wish we would have gotten one more
Yeah.
Jean Claude Van Damme Ringo Lam collaboration. I mean, three films together is nothing to scoff at. I mean, but how many has DiCaprio done with Martin Scorsese at this point, right? You know what I mean? Like, I feel like they had a great working relationship, and I feel like the films they did together are they're not awful by any means. So I think it would have been really kind of cool to see them collaborate on another film. And maybe, I mean, maybe there was something that was percolating, but again, if maybe the funds are not there by various investors, then you know how it goes. A lot of these things can fall apart. But unfortunately, Ringo Lam passed away, and we weren't able to see another collaboration. I think, what was it? I believe it was called Until Death.
Oh yes,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, Van Damme did that one with. I gotta believe. I feel like if Ringo Lam had directed, I mean, that one right there, can we just say is that one's pretty dark as is
Yeah.
because Van Damme is this drug addicted, detective. I mean,
Right.
that one's pretty dark. But I feel like if Ringo Lam had directed that one might have looked a little bit different as well. So
Yeah, because I think Ringo Lam, I think after this movie, he only makes three more feature length films, and they're all in Hong Kong. And
mhm.
then he does a segment on a kind of a movie that had multiple directors. In 2020, that was the last thing he worked on. But I wonder if, again, kind of to us talking about the market changing, if he looked at it as like these are the budgets I'm getting in Hong Kong. Why would I go back to America? Though I
Mm.
wonder, Van Damme. It does seem odd. I mean, I don't know what Van Damme's situation was like at that time. But you'd almost feel like he would have gone over there to Hong Kong and make a movie with him. So I don't know what and maybe that's what would have happened if Ringo Lam had lived longer. If he had made it into the 2020s. If maybe that's what would have happened is that movie that we wanted. Maybe they would have made it there in Hong Kong.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I know that Rennie Harlan had a basically a second career in Hong Kong because he did a few movies over there as well. So I mean, it's certainly a possibility. I mean, you look at a film like Knockoff. That's one
Yeah,
that Jean Claude did with Choi Hark.
yeah,
He did that one shortly after Double Team. So he was reteaming with Choi Hark, and that one is very much a Hong Kong movie. I mean, that one it's pretty much a Jackie Chan movie that inexplicably stars Jean Claude Van Damme
right.
and went theatrical. I mean, it's very silly, but I mean, it's very akin to something like Rumble in the Bronx. So maybe, I mean, I don't know, that actually could have been kind of cool if maybe Jean Claude, because I remember there was a period in the mid 2000s where um, Van Damme did have. I remember listening to interviews with him on various podcasts at the time, and he was residing in Hong Kong. So I'd like to think maybe he and Ringo Lam were working on maybe another project together around that time. But yeah, no, he was living there. He did have a place out there. So I don't know.
Yeah. No, it is
Yeah.
because I think looking at his recent stuff. I mean, I guess the one director you had talked about is maybe doing some films of is looking at like movies like Pound of Flesh and doing Ernie Barbarash. He had
Mhm.
3 movies with him that come out really well, and so that's but that again they're not quite the Ringo Lam level, but I think that's maybe one area for him where he still would find these moments with these directors to make stuff that comes out really really nice. So it is interesting to see like what's going to happen. I mean, like you said, he's getting older now. So again, even like a Pound of Flesh, that was 2015. That was 10 years ago now. So he was 10 years younger then, and he was showing off that he could still do the splits and all of that stuff in Pound of Flesh. So yeah, you even if you did one with Ernie Barbarash now, like what would that look like? I wonder.
Well, and I think that right there is an excellent segue and testament to the current market, because I'd like to think that a film like Assassination Games, or at the time it was called Weapon, um, when it was filmed and everything, but I'd like to think that a film like that, when it was in um, production and being shopped around, maybe they did go to the likes of a Ringo Lam or a Choi Hark or something like that. But in the end, I get the feeling that nowadays the market is pretty much, it's much quicker. It's like, look, we have our sets ready to go. The checks, they only have a finite amount of time, to film this or whatever. Someone like Ringo Lam or Choi Hark or whatever, those guys are consummate professionals, and I imagine they're kind of like, look, we, I'm a professional. I can't work under these quick conditions. I need this and that and everything like that. That I wonder if the studios are kind of like, you know what, we can get an Ernie Barbarash or a Simon Fellows or whatever. We can get these guys for half the cost, and they're pretty much yes men who are going to, they're pretty much the mercenary, they're mercenaries and guns for hire who are going to get the job done without flaunting a ton of artistic uh, freedom. You know what I'm saying? And so, yeah, I'd like to think that maybe they did go to those guys, but I mean that again, that's just the way the market is now, man.
Well, because you think about Darkness of Man, that was directed by James Cullen Brezak, who I knew of James Cullen Brezak back when he was first starting out. He put out some really hardcore horror movies, and so I was on mailing lists of his, and he wanted me to review those movies, and I just looked at them and I was like, they're not really for me. They're not the kind of movies that I would review. So I was excited when I started seeing his name pop up on some of these. He was doing some movies for Randall Emmett, and he did one that had. Kevin Dillon and Mel Gibson. I think it was called Hot Seat. He did with them, and then he also did which was Beyond the Law, was the Seagal movie that he did with
Oh yeah.
DMX. So but again, he is a gun for hire. Like you watch something like Beyond the Law, and there's a moment here or there in the movie where you're like, okay, that was a real director trying to put their stamp on the film, but for the most part, that's not it, right? It's just get in here and make this movie as quick as possible. And James Cullen Brest, he does Darkness of Man, and it comes out the same way. It looks like another one of those movies. And so to your point, like Darkness of Man, if that was made by Ringo Lam, would have been a completely different movie for what we ended up getting there.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. But yeah, no, I mean, look, you picked an amazing one for me. Because I mean, in the end, you can look at all these films, and I think it lends to a fascinating conversation, because you can look back and you can kind of say, well, what was going on, not just in what we can assume to be what was going on in Jean-Claude's headspace at the time, but we can also look at, where the market was and what was going on, and you can kind of see and a lot of the trends and everything like that at the time, which I think lends to a fascinating conversation, because I think after In Hell, he took a little bit of a break, but I'm trying to remember what he followed In Hell up with. If In Hell, Wake of Death.
Yes.
He
Yeah.
followed In Hell up with Wake of Death. And that's the other thing, too, that we have to consider. While these are direct-to-video films, he was doing one a year,
Yeah.
as opposed to, if you look at Dolph back in 2014 to 2019 or whatever, Dolph had done like 12 to 13 films.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Just because he was on set for for short periods, and they were, like I said earlier, they were just fleeting cameos. But back in this period, Matt, I mean, an actor like Van Damme or like Dolph, while it was a direct to video film, they could still make one a year, and that would be enough to to keep them stable. You know what I mean? They could survive off one direct-to-video film a year thanks to the rentals, and you know what I mean, and that particular market. Flash forward, 20 years later, they got to do like 5 to 6 films a year in crappy $1 million productions just to, we can assume, pay their bills and their rent or whatever it may be. And so, yeah. So anyway, that's going off on a tangent, but yeah, around this time, 2003, Jean-Claude did In Hell, and then I believe it was New Year's Eve, 2004. So about a year later, he had Wake of Death that came out. And actually, now that we're mentioning it, I believe Wake of Death was actually supposed to be directed by Ringo Lam. Now that we're talking about it, actually, yeah. But then something happened, and instead Felipe Martinez directed that one. But Wake of Death is another really, really cool one.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I didn't even think of that because that kind of makes sense with the tone and the feel of that movie that Ringo Lam would have they would have expected him to, or they planned on him directing it.
You also have that Hong Kong element to it too. Sorry to interrupt you, but it has a Hong Kong element to it as well. So yeah, now that I think about it, yeah, that was supposed to be directing that one, but something happened.
Yeah, they didn't say. I mean, I wonder if it was Van Damme was the reason, and maybe the two of them had a falling out. They don't say what it was. But they said another director was brought in and was fired after 2 weeks of filming in Cape Town. So it kind of looks like it had all kinds of things happening to it. So yeah, you just never know with these kinds of things. But to your point, one of the things that, like, again, talking about, like, Randall Emmett, I think we've talked about this with Uwe Boll as well, that like there are these directors that would like go to agents and find out who had something, who had a couple weeks off that wanted to make, a quick 60 grand. And so then you get these situations in the 2010s where you get these actors doing, like you said, like Dolph or whoever, doing 4 or 5 movies in a year, because that's how they were stacking them. Was just like, okay, I've got a couple weeks off between these two bigger things. Yeah, I'll make Uwe Boll's movie with him, for 60 grand. That works for me. And yeah, again, it was another way that the market changed. Yeah, Sean, anything else about In Hell that we haven't covered yet?
No, not really, man. I think it's a fine prison drama about this particular film, and not mention the slew of women in prison movies that came out throughout the 70s and the 80s and early 90s, right? This does not get as exploitive and grotesque as those, but it's a decent film from the muscles from Brussels. I wouldn't put it in his top 20, but I certainly wouldn't put it at the bottom.
No, and sometimes I think that's what you need, right? Like you said, if you're if it's just streaming on Roku, or like, again, you see this on one of the streamers, Fossum, Pluto, something like that as well. Just a decent movie. It's a unique Van Damme one. I think too, like if you're doing a Van Damme like triple feature or something like that, I don't know what you'd pair this one with. I guess unless you wanted to do like all 3 Ringo Lambs, right? If you did Maximum Risk, this, and Replicant, that's probably the best way you pair it with something else, because otherwise it doesn't really fit with anything else, I don't think, in his filmography, which I think is kind of a cool thing too, that he has these outliers like this when he started getting into the DTV world.
Yeah. Definitely. But yeah, no, thanks for inviting me. It was a lot of fun reminiscing and chatting this little forgotten film. I think anybody who has not seen it, just turn on Roku on one of the channels there. It's guaranteed to pop up at some point.
Yeah, you'll see it at some point. And it kind of go back to the old days of, turning on cable and catching it on cable just on a whim. It kind of make you a little more nostalgic for it.
Yeah, definitely. To do this as a double, I think it's a great pairing with Death Warrant.
Oh, yes.
You know what I mean? A prison movie of the early 90s compared to a prison movie of the early 2000s. And you basically get 2 different Van Dammes at different points in his career.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I think the only thing that the 2 movies have in common is one of the inmates gets set on fire. I think that's right. That's it. That's the only through line that you can pull between those 2 movies.
Yeah, actually, I think in Death Warrant, someone got set on fire too.
That's what I said, right? Yeah, right. So I don't remember the actor's name, but he was the guy in Breaking Bad who ran the junkyard. He was, character actor's been all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, but then you have the character 451 who
Yeah.
sets people on fire.
Right.
So, I mean, so
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that scene, I will say, because we're wrapping up here, but that scene actually was one of the one of the best ones, I think, from Lawrence Taylor, even though he's setting a guy, I mean, the guy's in a wheelchair, but we find out that the guy had sold out Billy when Billy was trying to escape, that he'd sold him out. And so Lawrence Taylor, because this guy could smuggle anything into the prison for him, he gets the guy to smuggle him in a flask of alcohol. And he goes, well, who's the alcohol for? And he's like, it's for Billy. And then he dumps the alcohol on the guy and sets him on fire. And it's like, whoa. And it's happening. When he says the alcohol is for Billy, what he's going to do with it. And so it was a very chilling scene. And again, yeah, not the way the guy gets set on fire in Breaking Bad. Though I do kind of wonder, because Breaking Bad, they set a guy on fire. Sorry, in Death Warrant. But in Breaking Bad, they set a guy on fire in his cell the same way that guy in Death Warrant gets set on fire. And I was telling my wife, I was like, I'm wondering if they did it in homage to that actor who was in Breaking Bad as the guy who ran the junkyard, if they just wanted to give him a little tribute when they were killing all the inmates in the prison.
I think the thing that we've kind of danced around that we need to acknowledge is I think way more people saw films like In Hell than I think we'd give him credit for. You know what I mean? While it was Van Damme in kind of a direct-to-video state where he was no longer commanding the box office, I think films like this still did get watched by a lot of people.
Yeah.
So,
oh yeah, I mean, it still has 135 user reviews, 32 critic reviews. Yeah, I mean, and like you were saying, the rentals were high. Also, USA Network. I mean, this was on. This is one that I remember being on. Maybe not as much as some of the other ones, like Derailed. I mean, Derailed seemed like it was on USA all the time. But this one was on enough, and so I think. Legionnaire was another one. I think did we say that one premiered on USA? I think. And yeah, so these movies were on, and they were shown. So I think you're right. I mean, I know when I reviewed In Hell and I didn't like it, a lot of people were like, "Really, you didn't like it?" I like this one. And so again, revisiting it now, I do appreciate it now. I think 29-year-old Matt, or I guess it was 28-year-old Matt in 07 is very different from 46-year-old Matt. I have different. My tastes have changed a little bit, and I appreciate things a little bit differently than I did then.
Yeah. Well, Matt, thank you again. It's been a lot of fun. All right.
Yeah.
The next Van Damme film, let's plan it, and you know me, I'm game.
Yeah, no. Thank you again for coming on. This was a lot of fun, and I can't wait to talk more Van Damme with you. Maybe we'll do some of those Ernie Barbaresh as we talked about. But yeah, definitely. And thank you everybody for listening. We'll be back soon. Bye, everyone.